Alright, good evening folks, and welcome back to Wilderness Wargaming. Tonight we're going to get into our very first video on Warhammer 40,000, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Sisters of Battle, and I like them a lot. They are my favorite army, maybe not my main army right now, but definitely my favorite. They have a long history with Warhammer. They did back at least the second edition, where they got their very first codex. You'll see a copy of its cover there on the left. And even before they had their codex, they were in the index, which I'll explain later what that is, as an auxiliary army you could use with the main ones that they had at that time, way back in 1995, 96, 97. Today they have a 9th edition codex. We're in the 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000 in the tabletop rules, and with the 8th edition, where they also got a codex, they got a major release of new models and then some even more in 9th edition. They're a great army, and they're a great way to get into the hobby if you just love the look of Warhammer 40,000 and want to do something just a little bit different than the first new player, because most first new players go straight for the Space Marines, the iconic superhuman warriors of the 41st millennium. Okay, so what happened before we had the Sisters of Battle? Well, so if you're not familiar with Warhammer, very early on, okay, well, even we're very early on, really. The year 2023 is very, very early on in the Warhammer time. In fact, we are lost in the mists of time. But if for all intents and purposes, our successors spent a long time, probably about the next 13,000 years, up to about the year 15,000, basically learning how to travel in space and exploring the galaxy. And they eventually discovered a means to travel faster than light, and they built a truly galaxy-spanning civilization of phenomenal technological advancement, truly like magical levels of technology. And this is after a number of other alien races had been fighting over the galaxy while we were blissfully unaware in our youth as a species, and left it open for our taking. Now, eventually we basically gained control of most of the galaxy, and a golden age happened, and then there was a time when the means of traveling faster than light, which is known as the warp, it's kind of like the hyperspace in Star Wars, except that it is full of horrible psychic entities that love to devour your brain and most of the rest of you as well. And it is like a very stormy ocean, and it developed a lot of storms which really cut humanity's worlds off from each other for the most part, and caused basically a collapse of human civilization. Now, there's this guy who you see on the left here, known as the Emperor. Okay, and the Emperor is basically an immortal human being who apparently has been around since long before the year 2023, thousands of years before us, and nobody knows exactly who he was or how he got that way, none of that. But anyhow, he showed up on Earth when it was about 5,000 years into this dark time, and he reconquered the Earth, and then he set about to reconquer the galaxy. Now, in the meantime, another race in this galaxy, the Eldari, or basically the Space Elves, they had accidentally caused the birth of a new Chaos God, which is one of these entities that lives in the warp, the four most powerful of them, and that thing was really hungry for them. But in the explosion of its birth, it cleared all these warp storms and allowed humanity to burst back onto the scene. And the Emperor was able to use that to begin reconquering the galaxy. Now, what that resulted in, though, was eventually the guy on the left, who is the Emperor, becoming the guy on the right, who is, turns out, also the Emperor. And despite his appearance, he is still alive. Now, what happened was the Emperor was a master of genetic and biological sciences and created a lot of super soldiers who became the Space Marines. And they had leaders known as the Primarchs. And about half the Primarchs, led by one called Horus, rebelled against him in a gigantic cataclysmic battle. The the emperor was able to defeat Horus with the help of one of the loyalist primarchs known as Sanguinius. But he was mortally wounded, and as a result he was interred in that throne you see on the right, where he is in stasis, and he is awake only psychically. He's the most powerful psychic entity amongst humans, and what he does sitting in there, and he's been in there confined for the last 10,000 years, is he maintains a beacon called the Astronomicon, which is fed by human psychers and acts as a gigantic navigation beacon that allows humans to travel the galaxy faster than light. And he also holds at bay these horrible entities that want to eat our faces off. Well, at least the psychic ones. There's other ones that want to eat our faces off more physically. But we'll get to that. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is not a nice place, but it really is a good place for putting some bad guys away if you want to do that. Okay. Now, 10,000 years later, the Emperor is still interred in that object called the Golden Throne, and that Golden Throne is a lot bigger than just what you see there. It is enormous. It is probably like the size of Germany when you consider all of its conduits and reactors and memory banks and everything else. It's truly preposterous in scale, and it is developing flaws that nobody quite knows how to fix because nobody knows how the Emperor built in the first place. And as a result, it is 1 minute to midnight. But it has been 1 minute to midnight for a really long time, really for about 10,000 years. Now, who are the Ecclesiarchy? Well, the Ecclesiarchy are part of the Church of Man that basically worship the Emperor. Now, the irony is that it works. It does work. The Emperor is quite real, and this does work for them. They are very, very effective in terms of what they are trying to accomplish, which is to purge mutants, aliens, things like that. Because most of those things are bad, they are very dangerous to humanity. The danger is quite real. It is not just pointless hatred. It is against real dangers that they do not know any better way to combat. The Ecclesiarchy is essentially the Emperor's church, and it is a major force in imperial life. It is a governance a little bit apart from the actual imperial governance. The administratum is the secular government, and you see there was this guy, Goj Vandire, who somehow became head of both at once. And this was about 5,000 years in the past, given the timeline of Warhammer 40,000. So about halfway between when the Emperor was interred and when the game events take place, when the tabletop combat takes place. Now, what he did was he got to be in charge of both at one time, and then he basically went bonkers, and he really caused a lot of problems. A lot of people were killed. He got completely out of control. The Space Marines, who exist a little apart from the Imperium, even though they protect it, kind of weren't sure what to do. But one of the things that he did was he discovered a planet with some extremely devoted female monastic or nun-like warriors, and they all, he demonstrated some capability of technology to them that they weren't familiar with, and they followed him. Well, eventually he got so out of control, this other guy, Sebastian Tor, came along and rallied the people to get rid of him. Now, the problem is he's protected by all these fanatical female warriors. The way this was eventually resolved was that came to a standoff, and the head of the female warriors, the daughters of the Emperor, I think they were called, they were the predecessors of the sisters, and they were led to see the Custodians, another faction in 40k, who were even more super than the Space Marines. And the Captain General took the leader of the sisters in to see the Emperor himself, and when she came back out, she disposed of Goj Vandire, the guy who was causing all these problems. Okay, and then Sebastian Tor became head of the Ecclesiarchy, and things were modified a bit so that that situation can never happen again. But also, one of the things that happened was the Ecclesiarchy was deprived of its ability to field armies, or so everybody thought. Didn't quite work out that way. what happened was that they issued an edict saying they could no longer have men under arms in the ecclesiarchy. So what did the church do? It formed an army of women, kind of like in Lord of the Rings, when the Witch King says, "No man can kill me," and girl whose name I can't remember stabs him in the face, says, "I'm no man." Well, it worked out, and it worked out pretty well for the ecclesiarchy too, at least from their point of view. Okay, so the sisters as they exist today are basically an army of what we think of as warrior nuns. Now, when I say warrior nuns, don't think of the sisters at a convent in the present day. Think more like, well, female soldiers in real life, or elite female athletes, except that they are dressed up in power armor, basically an armored spacesuit all the time. And they are very, very oriented on those weapons you see there, swords, and their bolt guns, which is basically a gun that fires a little rocket missile out of it, or a flame and melt it, because they like to purge the bad guys with fire. Okay, and they come in 6 orders, which are divided into 2 groups. So let's talk about them a little bit. In the upper left, you'll see the first one, the Ebon Chalice. That's the oldest one. The order that was founded by the original sisters, and they are the most quietly faithful order. Probably the most, in my view, the most stable, the least fanatical. They act in a considered and deliberate way, at least relative to the other sisters. I'm a little surprised that they're not more promoted by Games Workshop. Now, we also have the Argent Shroud to their right, the silver one. Now, this silver one, these are the sisters. These are a rare faction in Warhammer 40,000, in that they really do actually care about the common people. The Argent Shroud try to protect the Astra Militarum, formerly called the Imperial Guard, the common soldiers. They take care of, well, not take care of them, but they try to protect them or engage the enemy in a way that will minimize their casualties. And they do try to avoid civilian casualties. They focus on mobility, and they also are the most silent. They have an allusion to the old vows of silence that real-life religious figures would swear. So they don't speak a whole lot. Now, those 2 top ones, by the way, are my favorites of the 6 major orders. And the third one is the Sacred Rose. They're the white on the left. And they are, to me, a little bit, probably the least interesting order. If the Ebon Chalice is the more deeply considered faith, these ones are just, we're very faithfully faithy. It's a little bit like, they almost didn't know quite what to do with these guys. I came up with this one. If you're new to the game, most factions in the game that you're going to pick up are going to have 6 sub-factions as a standard, and when they were trying to come up with 6 for the ladies here, it seemed like they were really struggling with that one. And it seems to be by far the least popular in gameplay. In part 2, we'll get into the gameplay and why that is. But for right now, that's what you need to know about them. And they all belong to the Covenant Priors. This is, or Convent Priors. This is the convent that's located on Holy Terra, or Earth. And, well, it's the more, I wouldn't say sedate, but definitely the more faith and piety oriented group of sisters. Now, the other group here is the Convent Sanctorum, which is on Ophelia, I think 4 or 6. And that is the convent that is much more of the angry, aggressive sisters who are truly more aggressive about bringing the fight. The more offensive orders, if you will, as opposed to the more defensive ones. Now, first up, we have the one here on the center right, and this is the Order of Our Martyred Lady. Okay, and the Order of Our Martyred Lady is the poster girl order for all the sisters. They are very, very faithy, but they also yell and holler and crusade and attack and purge heretics a lot. In fact, they do it really strongly, and they are called the Martyred Lady because of the loss of their original founding sister saint. They were originally called the Order of the Fiery Heart, and they changed their name. Now, this order is the one that Games Workshop pushes by far the most in its game material. Sisters that you see are almost always from the Order of the Martyred Lady. They're very pushed. The Games Workshop really likes to use them as examples. They're always in the literature. The only thing I can imagine is that maybe they have far more models painted than the other ones. It's a nice looking scheme. I really do like it, but unfortunately their game rules are lacking. They're really not great. Now, that fact has caused things to crack a little bit. Morphin Val, we're going to discuss in part 2. The current commander of all of the sisters is not in the Martyred Lady. She's amazingly in the Argent Shroud, the Silver Order, which is odd because that's one of the orders that probably gets neglected the most. Now, next up we have the Valorous Heart. Now, this order is a little bit odd because although I said earlier it was a very offensive, very aggressive order, and it's gameplay and portrayal are more defensive in nature. They are the stoic ones. They are the ones that are willing to accept any level of pain and sacrifice, more so than even any of the others. And they'll just take it. They will just keep taking it. They have probably the best overall defense for the different orders in the game. And at one time they were thought to be probably the most powerful order on the tabletop. That's turned out not to be the case. And that is because the final order here, the Bloody Rose, which out of these ones is my favorite, partly because they have amazing red armor, and partly because they are the most hand-to-hand combat oriented order, has taken that mantle. The Bloody Rose is definitely not just not the most aggressive order, but specifically the most aggressive order in hand-to-hand combat. They are brutal in melee on the offense, and players that use them in tournaments tend to have the best performance in the orders. Now, some of that may be just biased towards them because once people proved it work, good Sisters players gravitated towards them. But either way, they are the current rated queens of the Sisters. And we're going to go into what they do a little later on. Okay. Now, one other thing you have is they're not just 6 orders. Those are the 6 orders majoris of the Sisters. Those are the big ones. They have minor orders, all of which are offshoots of one or more, I guess, of those larger orders, or I guess they could be, because nothing you'd worry over 40,000 is really set in stone, so they could be offshoots in different ways. But generally, they're going to be offshoots of one of the major ones. So here are the minorous ones, and you'll see 5 examples here. There's a lot of them. These are just 5 examples from the book. We see the Order of the Thorn, the Ashen Shrine, the Wounded Heart, the Iron Veil, the Glowing Chalice. And you can kind of figure out which order they fell under. For example, the Thorn there fell under the Valorous Heart. They get pricked by the thorns all the time. No, I'm sorry, under the Bloody Rose. They were under the Bloody Rose, which had thorns. The Order of the Wounded Heart fell under the Valorous Heart. And they do even more ridiculous feats of endurance than the Valorous Heart does. Unfortunately, I really liked the color scheme for the Wounded Heart, and I almost wanted to paint them that way, but I really didn't like their lore. Also like the Order of the Thorn. If you want to do white, that off-white you got there is the way to do it. White models notoriously hard to paint. Anyhow, Ashen Shrine. I believe the Ashen Shrine was supposed to be the Sacred Rose, and then the Order of the Glowing Chalice up there, that was the Ebon Chalice, and then we have the Order of the Iron Veil, which was the Order Minoris of the Argent Shroud, the Silver Sisters. Now, I picked for mine a color scheme based on, but not identical to, the Order of the Glowing Chalice. I went for a dark silver rather than the gray you see there, with gold on the trimming rather than the silver trimming. Kept the white weapons and the off-white undercoat, and I went for a more burgundy cape look. which I really liked, and also the white lock in the hair. And I'm going to discuss that when I get to discussing my custom order, the Silver Chalice, because you can make your own custom order here. Now, the sisters do hang out with some folks that are pretty shady. Okay. Now, if you're considering playing the sisters, and this is why they're a great way to get into the game, okay, you get a lot of positives. Okay, first of all, cost to count ratio. Okay, they are what I would call a semi-elite army. Okay, I divide armies in Warhammer into a couple tiers, and they're what I would call semi-elite, which is kind of the most common tier. It is basically they got overall pretty good capabilities, but they are not extremely limited in numbers on the tabletop. Now, one of the other things about them is because of the way their models are configured, you have a lot of versatility in using the same model as several different things, and that keeps your model cost in terms of actually buying the army down in a lot of ways. If you concentrate heavily on the actual sisters, you can use the same model to do quite a few different things. If you want to purge things with fire, they are the way to go. Melta is like a fusion type weapon, and it's really great. And it's hard hitting, anti-tank firepower at medium range, short to medium range. And then flamers are flamethrowers, and pretty great for clearing out enemies. They're an automatic hit weapon, so they're really great. And of course, you have the basic bolt guns. So in many ways, they're very close related to the Space Marines, at least in terms of offense. They have a number of strong stratagems. Stratagems are things you can play during the game to do special actions or enhance your chances at various points. Great melee option. They have a great melee option in the Bloody Rose, and you can play the Bloody Rose without actually painting your army as the Bloody Rose. It's legal. You can come up with another order that just happens to play like the Bloody Rose. Even without the Bloody Rose, there's still ways to get decent melee out of them. And also, they are very strong against Psychers. Psychers are the wizard magic type characters of Warhammer 40,000, and they have good, strong defenses against that. Negatives. Low toughness. Toughness is a score that they have that we're going to go over in part 2 of the video. Now, the way that most of the fighting occurs in the game is you make an attack roll to see if you hit. Then you make a toughness roll to see if you wound. Now, what the idea behind that is to see whether it was a glancing blow or the person was just able to shrug it off or not. And the higher the toughness, the higher the strength of the weapon has to be to have a good chance of wounding them. Okay? After that, you roll to see if their armor deflects. That's the basic sequence. And if the armor doesn't deflect it, then it goes through and it inflicts damage. Okay, but low toughness increases your probability of wounding. And since the whole game is based on 6-sided dice, a change of one value means a 16% change in chance. So low toughness hurts. They don't have a lot of long-ranged options. All their long-range weapons that I can think of are mounted on the vehicles. The only exception might be heavy bolters that you can give some of the sisters. But most everything is that they're going to carry around is going to be 24 inches or less. They're going to have few weapons with ranges longer than 24 inches, which isn't a huge weakness, but it's something to consider. They do not have psychers of their own, so you're not going to get psychic offense. Well, I shouldn't say that as an absolute. There are ways they can include psychers, but they're not truly part of the army. And also their theme is limited. Every army is going to have some mix of short to medium range shooting and melee, and it's really just a question of the details and the ratio of one to the other. Okay, so every army in Warhammer 40,000 has what's called keywords, and these are words that are, if the unit has that word assigned to it, then it has a certain effect or rule it can use. And sisters are divided into orders. So if they have the order keyword on their data sheet, they belong to an order, which we listed some of the orders earlier. Okay. The orders each have their own attributes. Now, some of the models in the Army do not have an order keyword. Now, when you make your Army list, the order keyword gets substituted in where the bracketed order would be in the base data sheet. So if it says order on there and you pick Bloody Rose, then you get Order of the Bloody Rose functionally in your Army. If the base data sheet doesn't have order in brackets anywhere, then they don't get the effects of the Bloody Rose. They can still be in the Army if they're in the Sisters book, but they can't get those benefits. And then there, basically, there's another keyword that makes them all a common faction, but you still have units that are not part of the common faction. We're going to go into that in detail on the data sheets. It'll be a little bit easier to understand when I start giving you some examples in part 2. But the 3 to really remember are, you want to remember, do they have the order keyword? Do they have the Adeptus Ministorum keyword that makes them part of the ecclesiarchy? And do they have the zealot keyword? The zealot keyword massively increases that particular unit's applicability to hand-to-hand combat, and it is hidden in a few places where you might not notice it. And it can be kind of key. You want to look for that when you're picking your units. Now, they also have a side rule called Sacred Rights. There are 6 of these. And they give additional bonuses to the sisters. Now, the trick with these is you can either roll 2 6-sided dice to get them, and I think you get you don't get to re-roll if you get doubles, which sucks. Or you can just pick 1. So you pick 1 or roll for 2. And these are additional rules. The reason I picked this one up is because you have to remember it, and also because, annoyingly, in the Sisters book, the page with the Sacred Rights is for some reason not in the table of contents. So you want to tab that page if you don't tab anything else, because they're very important, and yet they're not listed anywhere except on their actual page. The Order of the Ebon Chalice is different. Their whole shtick for their order is tactical-wise, is that they don't have to roll for 2. They can actually pick 2. That's their special ability. Now, also the stratagems and special effects. There's a couple here that I'm going to bring up now, although we're not going into the gameplay too much yet. Blessed Bolts, Rites of Restoration, Desperate for Redemption, Holy Trinity. These are big 4, and these are. I want to bring these up right now because these are good examples of how some Sisters units can really punch above their weight class. Okay, so for example, Blessed Bolts allows you to use a weapon called the Storm Bolter, which is a special weapon. You can assign, depending on the type and size of the squad, anywhere between 1 and 4. And when you play this stratagem, you can allow that Storm Bolter that was basically just a machine gun to suddenly become a really devastating weapon that inflicts mortal wounds, and mortal wounds can kill tanks. We'll talk a little bit about how that works later on, but that's something that's very important. Another one, Desperate for Redemption. You have another unit called the Repentia, who are sisters who got in trouble and are trying to redeem themselves on the battlefield, and you can use that stratagem to get some melee value out of them at the last moment. And then Holy Trinity is one of my favorites. That is one that it's a little quirky to get it rolling, but if you happen to have a squad that has all 3 of their favorite weapons in it, the Bolter, the Flamer, and the Melta, you can get some special effects out of it. Now, I bring this up just to give a little bit of a concept of what the Army's like. If you've never played 40K before, this may be a little bit overwhelming and opaque to you, okay? But if you look at the slides here and the pictures, you kind of get an idea of what the Sisters are all about. They're kind of a desperate last stands army fighting up close. Now, one thing it is important to understand is the Sisters are valiant, faithful, loyal warriors of the Imperium, but they are not superhuman. They are regular, normal human women. They are wearing power armor, armored spacesuits, which have power accelerators that make them stronger and faster than a regular person would otherwise. And they have very powerful weapons and equipment, but they are still fundamentally people. They don't have numbers assigned to them. They are not like clones from Star Wars. They are not the Unsullied from Game of Thrones. They are people, and they still have first and last names, and that puts them at an interesting juncture in the Imperium because they fight at the elite levels, even though they are just regular human beings, and they are all female. Well, although they do bring some boys along with them, but we'll go into that in the next video. Now, thank you for watching. In part 2, we're going to go into their specific units, their army composition, and tips for collecting them, which I've already hinted at. When you're collecting the sisters, you do want to take advantage of these, because these can reduce your costs and increase the flexibility of your army, so you don't have as many models that do very similar things. And it can really help you out. This is an easy army to collect and focus on, and really is a very strong pick for a starter army. And if you do not have them already, but you're already playing, I would strongly encourage you to consider them if you are thinking of starting a new army. Please remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bells, and comment on the video. This is our very first Warhammer video. We're going to do some more introductory videos, but we're also going to do videos down the road for people who are in the hobby but are not competitive, or are wondering how they can get the most out of what they have without having to put in the kind of investment that competitive play requires. So if you want to keep up with that content, please, again, like, subscribe, click the bell, and comment below. We can't wait to hear from you, and we look forward to providing you with more content about Warhammer 40,000 and all kinds of other activities in the future. Thank you for watching, and good night.